By the dawn of the third day, 3 full legions had been reduced to desperate, scattered fragments of a broken force. The sounds of panic echoed through the ravine, drowning out every command shouted by officers and leaving soldiers to meet their end alone. The Germanic fighters moved with cold, calculated precision. The walls of the ambush were tightening, methodically wiping out 20,000 soldiers from the most powerful fighting force the world had ever produced. At the heart of the disintegration, Publius Quinctilius Varus watched his cavalry abandon the column entirely. Varus understood what the numbers meant. The formation was shattered. The eagle standards had been surrounded. The path of retreat had been sealed off by a wall of packed earth and timber that the enemy had quietly constructed days before. Varus knew the fate that awaited any Roman general taken alive by the tribes. He drew his blade, cast one final glance at the overcast sky, and chose death rather than captivity. The governor of Germania ended his own command. The destiny of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions was already decided. The annihilation of 20,000 men had begun with a lie that led them into the trees. The Roman Empire was convinced that Germania had already been subdued. It believed the tribes had been brought to heel, that tribute was owed, and that the Rhine River no longer needed to serve as a defensive line. But the land itself was unforgiving. The Rhine divides the region cleanly in two. To the west sat the Roman province of Gaul, a land of roads, cities, and Roman order. To the east stretched Germania, an impenetrable wilderness of deep forest and marshland. Rome had spent 2 decades fighting to claim that forest, and it had convinced itself the conquest was finally complete. Publius Quinctilius Varus held the rank of general, but governed like a civil administrator. He was a man dispatched to organize a province, not wage a campaign. He marched 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, deep into the territory of the Cherusci, a formidable Germanic tribe, to collect taxes and arbitrate local disputes. These were heavy infantry units built for open-field warfare, designed to deploy into their famous checkerboard formations and crush opponents through disciplined engineering and superior numbers. Commanding the auxiliary cavalry was someone Varus trusted without reservation. Arminius, born a prince of the Cherusci tribe, had been taken to Rome as a young hostage to guarantee his father's cooperation. Now that same father, Segamer, rode alongside the army, seated as a guest of honor at Varus's table. Varus saw Arminius as the living bridge between the Roman world and the Germanic wilderness, the clearest evidence that the empire could civilize the north. He considered Arminius a testament to Roman assimilation, never suspecting he was looking at the man who would engineer his ruin. On September 6, 9 AD, Arminius arrived before Varus with a report. He claimed a rebellion had flared up to the north. Addressing it would pull the army away from its planned westward march. Arminius proposed a detour, a shortcut through the forest that, he promised, would allow the legions to put down the uprising and still reach the river crossing before the onset of winter. It meant routing a column stretching 9 miles through dense, unmapped woodland. Varus issued the order to turn north. 20,000 men stepped off the road and into the shadows of the Teutoburg Forest. Arminius then asked permission to depart, claiming he would ride out to rally friendly tribal forces to Rome's side. Varus agreed without hesitation. Arminius disappeared into the trees. He did not seek allies for the empire. He assembled a coalition to eliminate Rome's presence east of the Rhine. He united the Cherusci, the Marsi, and the Bructeri, rival Germanic clans who set aside generations of bloodshed for the shared purpose of driving Roman invaders from their homeland. In the opening hours, the terrain itself became the enemy. A violent storm rolled across the region. Temperatures plunged. The dirt paths dissolved into thick mud that clutched at every footstep. The assault began at the rear of the column. Stragglers, supply handlers, and isolated scouts simply vanished. There was no war cry yet, only the silence of men being swallowed by the undergrowth. Then the storm grew worse. The wind tore through the canopy, bringing down massive oak branches that crashed onto the marching soldiers. The Romans read it as an ill omen. The Germans treated it as a tactical advantage. By late afternoon of the first day, the column entered a narrow pass, and the hillsides exploded into violence. Thousands of Germanic warriors concealed in the brush unleashed a torrent of javelins. The legionaries attempted to form the testudo, the tortoise, but the trees were too dense and the ground too broken. The Germans charged down the slopes in short, devastating bursts, striking hard and retreating into the forest before the heavy infantry could mount a response. Varus recognized the danger and ordered a halt to construct a fortified camp. That first night, survivors huddled behind hastily dug earthworks, burning their wagons and stripping anything that slowed their movement. They lay in the dark and listened to what was coming from the forest. The Germans were celebrating, chanting to their gods, and processing the prisoners they had seized during the day. The sounds drifting through the trees were deliberate. This was psychological pressure. Every soldier knew what capture meant. Sleep was not possible. At first light, the Romans abandoned their supplies and pushed north in a desperate bid to reach open ground. The forest offered no mercy. For 2 days, the column bled from unseen attackers until the exhausted survivors were funneled into a choke point, a narrow corridor between a steep ridge and a vast, impassable bog. This was the Calcareous Narrows. Arminius had designed the killing ground. Along the hillside, his forces had built a camouflaged barrier of compacted earth and timber running parallel to the Roman path for more than a quarter of a mile. As the Romans entered the gap, Germanic warriors took their positions on the rampart, safely elevated above the column, and poured stones and spears down into the packed ranks below. The legions were boxed in. On one side stood the wall. On the other spread the black swamp. Discipline finally gave way. A group of Roman cavalry attempted to rush the fortification. The horses panicked in the constricted space, crushing their own infantry underfoot. The Germans opened passages in the wall, surged out to pull down the riders, then withdrew back behind their defenses. Varus's blind faith in Arminius was not the only factor in the disaster. The legions were beaten by the environment itself. Heavy armor became deadweight in the mud. Bowstrings snapped in the driving rain. The Roman formation was crushed and paralyzed. By the third afternoon, the field had become a slaughterhouse. The cavalry had long since fled. The infantry was pinned between the Germanic wall and the swamp. There was nowhere left to go. Varus surveyed the ruin of his command and made his final decision. After his death, what remained of the command structure collapsed entirely. Some soldiers followed his example. Others laid down their weapons, hoping for a mercy that never came. The rest fought in tight clusters until the weight of the surrounding tribes overwhelmed them. The killing went on until nightfall. The forest floor was covered with the dead. When the rain finally cleared the mud from their armor, the silver and gold insignia of the emperor's own legions gleamed briefly before sinking into the peat. The ledger of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest is final and complete. 3 full legions, nearly 20,000 men, were permanently struck from the Roman rolls. The numbers 17, 18, and 19 were never assigned again. They were retired in disgrace. Arminius dispatched Varus's severed head to the king of the Marcomanni as a gesture of alliance. The king, unwilling to provoke Roman retaliation, forwarded it instead to Emperor Augustus, who had it interred in the family mausoleum. The psychological toll on Augustus never healed. The historian Suetonius records that for months, the emperor could be heard crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome abandoned any ambition of absorbing Germania. The legions pulled back to the Rhine. Forts, walls, and watchtowers rose along its banks. That river became the defining cultural and political boundary of Europe for the next 4 centuries. Because of 3 days lost in the mud, the Latin language stopped at the Rhine. Augustus's doctrine of perpetual expansion was permanently shattered, signaling Rome's transformation from a conquering force into a state defined by the limits of what it could hold. One commander's misplaced trust in the wrong man bent the course of human history, and it confirmed what empires have always struggled to accept, that even the greatest military power on earth is only as durable as the terrain beneath its feet.